Hey everyone. Today, me and Tete are going to be actually doing a podcast that our friend of ours, Halliburton, has suggested in a way because she wants me to comment that Clark Kent or Superman is actually very similar to Tete's character, Andrei Novokshinov.
Yes, absolutely. So this comment had came from a post in which we had been playing The Sims, if you will, and Andre and Clark had met each other in The Sims, and we noticed a lot of similar personality traits that Clark possesses, or at least embodies and shows, that Andre also has. And when Hellevorn made this comment, the connection was there. And when I began to get back into Clark slash Superman this earlier this year, after kind of a almost a 20-year absence, if you will, I began to realize why I liked Andre because he reminded me a lot of Clark, and there are a lot of similarities, even though the men are quite different to a degree.
True. I think the most obvious thing is that they're both relatively innocent, right?
They are relatively innocent. There is quite an innocence to Andre with his intent and his purposes, and he is a tiny bit idealized. He thinks of ideals, very similar to how Clark has a very set standard of what is right and wrong, and Clark is very innocent in the pursuit of trying to brighten the world, if you will. And Andre has this to a degree because Andre gets invested with people he meets, and while he knows he can't really brighten the world per se, um, Andre wants to brighten the lives of peoples that he is involved with.
That's true. And I think both of them have a relatively black and white mentality.
There is a black and white mentality. There will always be shades of gray that emerge in troubling dilemmas and moral questions, as well as episodes of self doubt and crisis of the self. But I think for the most part, there is a black and white mentality. It's not fully condemning. I would have to say both Clark and Andre are very understanding of external factors, why something turned out the way it did, or why people turned out the way they did, or what forced people to take an action. But when it boils down right down to the bone, um, Andre and Clark have a very set idea of what is right and wrong, and they think that people should at least try to live up to these ideas of right and wrong because they feel if you don't, this could cause a lot of sadness for people or just make the world shitty in general.
Right. And I think it makes sense, especially for Clark, because he is from, the 30s and the 40s, and that was more of a more innocent time. And also the fact that he is someone who has to convince himself that he is a defender of the earth. So if he doesn't have these ideals, it could just all fall apart on him.
It could fall apart on him. And when you think about, and I'm referring to golden age canon rather than the bigger picture of silver age. I mean, we'll probably get into silver age in a little bit, or modern, or any like cinematic verse or new 52 or anything like that. But golden age, basically he's made a very conscious decision to go out and use his powers for good. He knows he has them. He doesn't know what to do with them. He's like, why do I have these? What should I do with them? And then he realizes, my parents told me I could do it for good, and I'm going to do it for good because there's a lot of ugly shit in this world, and people could use, strength and power and get stuff done, as well as stand up to people who think they're all powerful and all that. Why not stand up to the bullies and corrupt and the cruel people and the oppressors and the people doing wrong and dirty by everybody? Why not stand up to them? Because there's
Mhm.
other people standing up to them, but they need a bit of help. You know, they need a bit
That's
of
true.
they need a fulcrum against that power,
Right,
and
right.
he makes the conscious decision to do that. So his role is more smaller, which I think makes him more accessible and relatable as Golden Age, because it's not so much being a defender of the earth as it becomes like in Silver Age and stuff like that. But it is to a degree, but I mean, I think also being somebody who wants to see justice done and just shitty thing, you know, like just to tear down the mantle of corruption and you know, people doing bad things to one another, you know, corruption, bad conditions, um, doing wrong by people, injustices. It's very much of righting the wrongs in the world and using those powers for that. So he is driven, and the core crux of him, the nucleus within him, if you will, are these ideas of justice and doing the right thing, and you know, going the extra mile for people. And I think that's a it's a beautiful thing to see, because it's innocent and simple, but it's something that is so needed in the world regardless of the time. And
Mhm.
Clark embodies that beautifully, and Andre does too. Andre's is just more watered down. It's more on an individualistic scale, it's more on a selfish scale,
Mhm.
mainly because Andre's in a very different context than Clark. You know, Andre is in the Soviet Union. Andre has seen the Soviet Union tear apart the sovereignty of his own people and have his own ethnic identity basically erased. And Andre does not feel unified within the Soviet Union. He does
Mhm.
start to feel it a little bit around World War II, but prior to that, he does not. He thinks of himself as his own people. He thinks of himself as a
Mm.
Don Cossack of the steppes, and he's very concerned with helping the South try to survive under communism, because unfortunately southern Russia probably suffered the most of a lot of brutal things from Soviet Union stuff, as well as things like, you know, bad famines and a lot of terrible food riots, people protest. You know what I mean? There, it was more of a, it's more of a cruel thing. So, Andre's not really thinking about the bigger picture of everything or the way society works. He's thinking about protecting people he's encountered, and that he has attached himself to, are people that he feels are vulnerable, and he feels like he can help them out.
That makes sense. I think that's another really great comparison you had. And, that shows us more about 70 Fierce Years because we never, really talked about the other things that happened, such as the famines and, what happened to Andre before, he got betrayed by Kirka and sold out to the communists.
Exactly, exactly. Andre had so much going on with his life, and Andre, Andre was on the anti-communist side. He was essentially with the White Army. But one thing you have to realize with the thing of Southern Russia and the Don Cossacks, they were not necessarily Tsarist supporters. A lot of people think, oh, White Army, instantly Tsarist supporters. Not a lot of them were. A lot of them kind of saw it as a dying thing. And many Cossacks, the Don Cossacks especially, felt betrayed by the Tsarist Empire, because for the long time of the decline of the Tsarist rule, if you will, things had done very badly for the Don Cossacks. They felt very betrayed or let down by the Tsarist Empire. They felt that they were being exploited, being used in wars that didn't matter anything to them, but it was just helping a bunch of rich pricks, so to speak, you
Mhm.
know, like the czar and all the other big wigs. And also it didn't affect anybody. And also too, they don't feel a connection to the North. They don't. They're very separate and sovereign. Of course, this has changed. I don't think that really exists anymore, although I have seen Russian forums where people do feel the differences, and Southern Russians will say they don't really feel any connect with Northern Russian. Maybe that's what's kind of fueling the weird stuff that's going on right now. God bless
Mhm.
everybody
That's
down there.
true.
Hope you're safe. Don't go out
Mhm.
because of the missile strikes. But I guess to make a long story short, um, there's a lot with Andre's story, and Andre feels very passionate about certain things, and Andre's with the Don National Army, if you will. And what they wanted to do is not so much to go back to any kind of czarist regime or empire, but what they wanted was to have their own nation, their own sovereign autonomy of a country,
Mhm.
and they feel like a separate ethnicity from everybody else, and they wanted to have that, and they wanted to not necessarily try to go with a fully capitalist system or whatever kind of system. A lot of them thought, there's a lot of good things about socialism, but we don't want this extremity that the Bolsheviks are giving us, because the Bolsheviks are using way too many radical means, collectivism, too much just killing people. And they don't want that. They want a softer version of socialism. Yeah, they want education. Cossacks had always been very proud of being educated, unlike a lot of Russians who
Peasants.
unfortunately wasn't educated.
Yeah.
And they did want things like education. They did want things like a sustainable economy. They wanted more agricultural reforms and more, more of an equal playing field. But they did not want what Bolsheviks wanted, which was just to put everybody in a big collective and make everybody the same.
Mhm.
They wanted to have a sovereign nation and autonomous government and everything, and their own identity, being fully recognized. And Andre's very passionate about it, and he's still passionate about it despite being conglomerarized, if you will, into the Soviet collective.
Mhm. Mhm.
And Andre will always have those values of individualism and dignity and being true to oneself. And Clark does embody this too. It's just that Clark's is more general because he's dealing with an American city that is essentially reflecting the melting pot. And of course, this is the purpose of Clark's original, what he's meant to represent. He's supposed to represent the immigrant struggle. He's supposed to represent what it means to deal with the simulation and the melting pot, and what does that mean, and what is an identity, and you know let us be individuals governed by the right thing, by a set of good morals that will make the world a better place for everybody, and learning to understand people. So it's more generalized. It reflects the melting pot of everything. But Andres is more individualized and more focused on something specific. Although, like I said, Andre does go through a development where um, I think he learns to embrace the collective a little bit more, because he realizes that a lot of people, like people of different ethnicities and different locations, they're not too much different from him and his people. And I think that's a big lesson Andre is learning, and he will continue to learn.
Mhm. That makes a lot of sense. That's a really great comparison between these 2. Both, Clark and Andre struggle with being an outsider, and I think this idea of being integrated as well, which I think they both enjoy later on. As you said, Andre has to learn to enjoy being integrated, and Clark, I think he never really had the experience of living on Krypton, so it's a bit different, but he does know that he is an outsider, and he has to hide his powers and his identity, and he does try to find the solace in being integrated and being part of the human society, even though he is an alien.
Exactly. You have described that so beautifully. That is the beauty of Clark's character. Yes, he did not have the experience of living on Krypton, but he knows he's different. And when he learns of his actual heritage and who his as birth parents were, it's a very tough and wrenching experience for him. But he realizes he is different. But at the same time, he's reflecting on the fact that he was raised, very human, and even though he did not meet his birth parents, he still has Jonathan and Martha, Jonathan and Martha Kent, who have been so essential in shaping his character and everything. And I always like to say that Jonathan and Martha are the MVPs of why Clark is Clark and why we have Superman.
That's so true. I think it's
Yeah,
because they are so wholesome that they imparted their wholesomeness to him.
they did. They did. I
Yeah.
mean, they were very wholesome. They were very bright-eyed and innocent. I mean, I think not really naive. I think they knew there was a lot of ugly things in the world, but it's one of those things where it's a bit of hope punk, like
Mhm.
dare to be different, dare to go against all the darkness and nastiness of the world. If people say, hey, be corrupt and be,
Mhm.
a selfish son of a gun and, hurt people
Mhm.
to get ahead,
Mhm.
don't do that. Be different.
Absolutely.
Hurt
Yeah.
those who are
Mhm.
hurting others.
Interesting points, but how about Joel? Joel, he is someone who is very ethical.
I think Joel, just to throw the monkey wrench in there, I think Joel is a little bit similar, but I feel like Joel, he's more dark and questioning. He's the devil's
He's ethical,
advocate.
though. He is someone who would stand up to these criminals and all these people who are saying, whatever, right? But in his
Yeah,
personal life, especially with affection, he is very stingy. He doesn't want,
that's
that
true.
graphic I showed you from that manga, I
Yeah,
don't want to feel emotion because when I do, I'll break apart. That's what he is. I mean, he's still a very ethical person. He does not stand for corruption. So he would actually agree with Superman in that aspect. But in his
like a
personal
blood
life, he wants to
together.
be basically segregated. He doesn't want to be invested in or invest in people. He's perfectly fine being a ghost in people's life,
That's
just
true.
passing by and never really connecting. And, realizing that out of so many people in New York, how many people are actually going to know who he really is? Even his own parents do not want to know who he is because they prefer to live in a fantasy.
That's true. They do. So Joel is very different from Clark in that respect because Clark, like Andre, wants to connect with people, and he does heavily invest himself when he does connect with people, even if it's people he may not meet again in the grand scheme of things. Those people leave a big impact on him, like people he's helped. They're like, oh, I wish I could pay him, but in some ways they have, because they left a big impact on his life, and it made him think hard and long, and also think about why he values the humanity that he does have on earth you know
Right. And I
um,
guess Joel's counterpoint to that would be that's just an abstraction. Just do your duties and don't think so much about the emotions.
oh my gosh, you can't say that to Clark. He
He's the
gets very
opposite.
emotional about what he
Yeah. So I
does.
think he's just like Andre then. He's very emotional. While Joel, if he was Superman, he would just be so detached.
Oh my gosh, detached Superman. Like, he's like, all right, I beat up this corrupt politician, the conditions in the factory improved, yeah, bye.
Yeah. And then he's trying to ignore his own emotions. And this is why Joel is the modern Tantalus, as we talked about. He does not want to feel certain emotions. And this is why he's also, trying to suppress his own sexuality because he knows that if he expresses his sexuality, he will become more emotional.
That's true, he will. So oh, Joel, I don't know, poor Clark and Andre would just not compute. Andre and Clark are looking at Joel, and their brain is like 404 not found. Like, no, file not found. Like,
Joel is a unique man.
he's a very unique man. So Andre and Clark cannot understand this because Andre and Clark are very innocent, emotional men. And you know what? A lot of people would say it's stupid or to their weakness, but they carry it with such strength that it doesn't feel immature or weakness at all. In fact, if anything, it's their driving strength in a way.
Right. And how about for Joel? Do you think his cynicism is his driving strength or what is it?
I guess it is. um I just want Joel to open up and be happy in love. I want love for that man. Love, love,
Well,
love,
he claims to love his parents,
love,
right? He loves
love.
his parents.
So he claims. I mean, love,
He
love,
loves
Joel.
his
The
parents. He
power of
loves
love
his
compels
parents. He's such a
you.
good son.
I'm like, the power of love compels you.
He loves his job and he loves his parents.
Do you, Joel? Do you?
Yes. Can you explain what love is, he would say? You can't
Oh my
because it's
God,
so
Joel.
subjective. So
No, I
you have to
refuse
convince
to
me, he says.
explain that
You
to you.
have to
You know who
convince
it
me.
is.
You have to convince me, Clark and Andre,
Oh my
that
God.
this is actually worth investing in because I am not doing anything unethical. Right, Clark? He would say, I know you love ethics. I love talking about it too. And he's going to, and I would love to have a table discussion with you and kind of deconstruct what it means. to be ethical in a
Oh my
personal
gosh,
realm. I don't mean
no.
corruption. I mean like in a personal meaning, like this idea of not investing anyone. Is that immoral or is that is it ethical or is it unethical? I really want to break into that, and I want you to tell me that because you're the arbiter of all of this, aren't you? He would say.
And Clark's a little mad. He says, Mr. Farber, I don't know why you would say I'm the arbiter of it. I mean, where do you get that idea that I'm
Defender
somebody?
of justice.
I said, oh my god, he went for the neck.
Oh, he does. Like, how Joel is actually a very nasty person.
No, don't be mean to Clark. What did Clark do to deserve this? He's just
He's a
trying to fight
bully.
corruption in the city.
Is Joel a bully?
He's a bully, and Andre's like, "Hey, Yolenka, leave Claruzia alone." This is what he calls Clark. Leave Claruzia alone.
He's like, no, I'm not bullying him. I'm just, putting a point out there. You're a public figure, aren't you? So can't we just talk about the stuff you've talked about? I mean, if you didn't want it to be discussed, why did you make it public?
Is he talking? Is he addressing poor Clark?
Yes.
Okay, and Clark is like, I'm. I didn't make it public for myself. I made it public so these people would be exposed and then they would be stopped. I didn't really want to be part of it, but unfortunately, Lois keeps publishing those darn stories about me. And on top of that, it's hard for me to avoid the public eye, but I try to keep an anonymous identity, which is why I do that. I don't go around as my actual self doing this. Now, do I, Joel?
He's like, that's true, you don't. But he's like, you still didn't answer my question.
And what question was that, Mr. Farber?
Oh, am I doing anything unethical? Why are you having a stick up your ass and acting like I did something wrong, like those corrupt politicians? I have done nothing wrong. Can you please, okay,
Oh
lay
my
out,
god!
tell me all the arguments, okay? Get out your pen and paper because I know you're a fucking reporter. Tell me what I'm doing wrong.
And then Clark's like, I had said nothing. I criticized nothing about you, Mr. Farber. I was just warning you that maybe you shouldn't throw the baby with the bathwater, as well as I think you should be more considerate of people around you and realize that you can have an impact on people on a more personal level. And also, I think you should propose to Miss Spitzer. I think she loves you. At least she can love you for who you really are, not have to worry about a double identity like I have to worry about. So I think you should take advantage of that because not all of us have the luxury of actually being ourselves and not having to take on worrisome responsibilities.
And Joe would say, but everyone has a double personality. Sorry, a double identity. You think the guy walking down the street that I just talked to 5 minutes ago to buy a hot dog from knows who the fuck I am? You think I'm ever going to see him again?
And then Clark is like, that's not the point, Mr. Farber. I'm not talking about people you pass in randomly. I'm talking about people who actually care to connect with you. And I can see that with Miss Spitzer. And I think you're doing her a grave injustice, not acknowledging her, not supporting her. And please don't give me that thing that you're doing the ethical thing by giving lip service to her. I mean, to actually be connected and actually form a relationship with her. I think she wants that. I think you two would be a good match. And he's like, maybe you do have a double identity. I don't know. Maybe you're actually a fairly decent human being. But I wouldn't know because what I see before me is a very stuck up, pretentious academic scholar who thinks that he knows everything and that he's outsmarted the whole world. Well, even despite that, I think you'll learn your lessons very hard when everything about your pride comes crashing down, Mr. Farber. And that can happen very quickly, very fast. And I know that very well. And I know it will happen. It's inevitable.
I thought this podcast was about Andre versus Clark. Now it's turned into Clark
Joel versus
versus
Superman.
Joel.
Joel's worse than Batman.
I think he is. You know what?
Worse
Let's
than
do a
Batman.
comparison. Superman versus Batman is actually Joel versus Clark.
It is no. Except they're not beating each other up.
Verbally jousting.
Well, yeah, verbally.
Verbal
I mean,
jousting.
oh my gosh, does Joel have verbal kryptonite for Clark?
Yes, he does.
What is the verbal kryptonite?
He calls him defender of justice all the time in a very mean and mocking way. And he never talks about it in terms of really obvious things like, corrupt politicians and, mean factory bosses or whatever. He always talks about it in terms of these very personal things like, should I be a self-denier? What does friendship actually mean? What does connection actually mean? Can you define it for me?
And then Clark will think very long and hard.
You can't. You can't define it because it's
No,
so
I can
subjective.
define it, Mr.
No, you
Farber.
can't. No, you
I
can't.
can. It can be
Get out
defined.
the Cambridge Dictionary.
He says, "Oh," he says, "I will." He said, "I'll bring out the Oxford and Harvard and
And
everything."
they are all objective. I am talking about the subjectivity of it all. I am a man who is okay with not being attached to anyone in that
And then
manner.
Clark is like, "Man does not live alone. Man is not an island."
I
And
am
he
not
also
an island. I agree. See, I am so close with my parents.
he says, "You're not, Mr. Farber. I've observed you from afar. I know that you're not close with your parents. If anybody who knows about being close with parents, it's me. I was close with my parents until they passed away in 38. So I was close with them right from till I turned 30. For 30 years of my life, I was close with my parents. They shaped and molded everything about my life. I owe everything to them. I know what being close to a parent is. You, Mr. Farber, are not. You are merely masking a facade of this kind of son or filial duty that you feel you have to uphold because your life is empty, hollow, and meaningless, and you feel neglected and exploited by the dysfunction of your parents. And excuse me if I've really ripped the band aid off, but that's what you are. And you have nothing else to go on except for this fake sense of filial duty that you wear as a mask in front of everybody as your double identity. And not to mention, you refuse to invest yourself in friendships because you feel that the whole world is pointless and meaningless. Of course, you'll agree with things like ethics and morals. That makes you look good. And of course, you have a conscience. I won't deny that. I can see that and I admire them. One of the very few things that I actually admire about you, Mr. Farber. But you have to realize that the world is not at all like everything your parents have done or said, and that there is meaning in connecting with people and getting to know people and actually investing in something and stop being so damn selfish. He said there's a lot there's a lot that you need to learn, Mr. Farber. And I think one stepping stone to actually being an actual man with an actual heart and an actual human in this world would be to get closer to Miss Spitzer because somehow she sees something in you that many people, even myself, can't see. And she wants to connect with you. And I think it's cruel of you to deny her that. And if I could have your opportunity to actually be my real self with someone that I love and care about and be able to build a bond with them without any worries or pretenses or any escape clauses, if you will, I would certainly pursue it, but I can't. I don't have that privilege. You do, Mr. Farber. I wouldn't squander it if I were you.
And then Joel says, "Well, I really appreciate the consideration, Mr. Kent, professional reporter of the Daily Planet. I really, really enjoyed it. You really nailed down all the points I always knew about myself since I was fucking 15 years old. Thank you for saying something that I knew for more than 10 years."
And he's like, I'm glad somebody explained it to you because you apparently don't want to admit or face that, do you? He's like, you prefer to wear this mask and you prefer to be isolated like a little oyster in the ocean, don't you, Mr. Farber?
He's like, "I'm
Hmm?
not isolated. I have Sam and Frankie. You know how
He says,
close we are."
really? Really? Are you that attached to them? I mean, it seems so far you seem to resent them. You especially resent Mr. Abramoff very much.
I don't resent him. He resents me.
And then it's mutual then.
Yeah, I guess. But friendship's not always so peachy.
Is it? I mean, I suppose if you actually put effort into it,
And what is effort?
effort would be humbling yourself, Mr. Farber. I think that's something that maybe you're incapable of. And it's something that I have to often remind myself because it's so easy of men in our positions your
You
academic
superpowered
acumen.
fuck.
He said, I wouldn't resort to such name calling, Mr. Farber. It looks very unprofessional, especially a man of your profession. But no, but men in your position that you are an intellectual of intellectual acumen and that you're a man
Did
of
I
wealth.
say I was intellectual?
You claim to be.
I
You
don't
seem to
I
be.
don't claim to be an intellectual.
I think you are.
That's
You
your
are.
opinion.
That is my opinion. I think that's what the rest of the city thinks of you, Mr. Farber. That's the
Really?
opinion I've
Still doesn't
gathered
think
from the
I'm an
Lower East Side.
intellectual. He thinks I'm a dud.
It doesn't matter what Mr. Abramoff thinks. His opinion is very trite compared to the rest of the Lower East Side. But as I said, men in our position, you with your intellectual acumen, and of course, you're intelligent and debate logic and superiority, of course. And of course, me with my problems of superpowers, and you know what? Sometimes moral. I will admit, sometimes I do have moral hubris, and it's something I
You
struggle with.
do. You do. Look at how you're talking to me.
He's like, well, of course. He said, "That's just we're just two deeply flawed men, aren't we?"
Oh yeah, we definitely are. And you know what? I have held up my responsibilities, which you love, by the way, for Miss Spitzer. I've talked to her. I helped her with a couple of things. I've lent her money. I've helped her out with a lot of emotional things too, and helping her has solved her own emotional crises. I don't think I've done anything wrong. I've just, decided to keep it as friendship because I value friendship.
And then Clark is like, "Of course, you've satisfied all the external factors, all the external requirements that satisfy your conscious, because you do have a conscious, Mr. Farber. But you have to ask yourself, what is missing?"
He's like, missing? Everything's missing because we're alive. As long as we are alive on this earth, something will be missing because,
And then
we don't live in a perfect world.
he says, "No, we don't. But if something's missing, should we not try to either find that or create to fill the void that is of something missing?" And I think you know exactly what I mean about you and Miss Spitzer. I think you know very well what I mean. And I will not try to argue with you. It's a futile effort. I have more pressing things to do.
Of course you
But
do.
I will say this. Think long and hard about everything from Miss Spitzer's point of view and think about her own experiences, and maybe I don't want to use a bad word, but I think I'll let the Colonel say something. Colonel, what was that thing you had said to me the other day about Mr. Farber? And then Andre comes over. Ah, yeah, Yolenka. To be blunt, this is what I told Claudia as we were knocking back whiskey. He didn't want to drink whiskey too much though. He says he has to drive or something. I don't know what he's doing, but he said. I said to him, I said, Yolenka needs to get his head out of his ass.
Hmm.
You need to get your head out of your ass, Yolenka. Maleshenka loves you, and I think you should love her back in the way that she loves you, not just you trying to be some sort of, the pompous hero and solve everything for her. Leave that to him. But you, on the other hand, marry her. That's all I have to say on that matter. Marry her and get your head out of your ass. I'm out of here.
And then Joel doesn't say anything and then he just sighs. And that's pretty much it.
That was fun. That was a fun role. I enjoyed embodying Clark there.
Yeah, that was really interesting. We need to do this more, but I think we learned a lot about these three based on this role play. I know it was kind of off topic, but I thought it was really
It
interesting.
was really interesting. I think we have a little bit more to go with Clark and Andre. Like for example, um, for you as someone as an audience, if you will, of both, if you will. Although I guess you're more experienced with Andre because of our sharing of the work
Hmm.
itself. Um, what other
Uh-huh.
similarities would you see?
I think besides the innocence and I guess the closeness with the family. with his,
They're
for Clark, it was his parents and the people of the town. And for Andre, it was the people of his stanitsa.
Yes, very much so. There is that strong parallel. Andre, of course, was very close with his family, but also the people with his stanitsa, which to him was an extension of his own family. You have Clark, who of course was very close with his parents. He was also very close with people from his small town in Kansas, and then when he gets to Metropolis, the big city, he starts to get close with other people, and that's, like a lot of the people at the Daily Planet, like Lois, a few other people like the editor and some of the copyists, and other people that he encounters in the city, even people he may not see again for a long time. He gets very close with them, and he's very much like Andre. They they want to embrace others. They want to be heavily invested in others, because I think for Clark and Andre, the the height of happiness and purpose in life is to be interconnected with people. And I think it's a beautiful thing to see, especially in a world that maybe tells us it's foolish or naive or harmful or detrimental. Maybe to a degree it is, when it's done the wrong way with the wrong people at the wrong time. But I think with the innocence that Clark and Andre embody and live in and exude and radiate,
Hmm.
I think it protects them in a way. I think it gives them an immunity, and that um, there will always be this warmth and innocence of this openness to embrace other people.
That's true. And also, I think they're also a product of their time. They're people from the early 20th century, which I know Joel technically is, but I did not create Joel with historical accuracy or atmosphere in mind. He is actually meant to be very modern, as in 2020s.
He really is. He's frightening. Clark is
Yeah, I
terrifying.
wanted to explore that. These mundane things that could become very frightening.
That's true. That's true. Joel is his own horror story, isn't he?
A horror of the mundane.
Horror of the mundane, he is. And I guess for Clark and Andre, I think they are products of their times. But then you know what? I think Clark and Andre, they might do okay in our time. Maybe people will think they're weird and naive and wonder what's wrong with them. And of course, this is why I say Golden Age will always be different than Silver or Modern, or
Hmm.
especially the cinematic universe, which is kind of whiplash at times from Like it's so whiplash, like, oh my gosh, 180 on everything. But um, still, I think both Clark and Andre. I think no matter where you put them, no matter what they will do or where they will go, I think they will have this obstinate fierceness about wanting to embrace others, or if they can't embrace others, beat the crap out of people who are hurting other people.
That's true. But I guess it's like less easy to spot with people like Sam and Joel, whose way of hurting people is so subtle.
It is subtle. It is subtle.
There's no way I think Clark can really sense it unless he's like, spying on them 24/7. But he has better things to do than spy on two nobodies.
I don't know. Unless they were involved in crime, I don't know.
No, oh no. I mean, for Sam, it's toxic positivity, which we should talk about sometime.
We should. We should. I don't think Clark would overly like Sam that much, even though he is positive, because I think he can sense Sam's fakery a mile away, just like
Why does
Andre.
he think he's fake?
Sam is too positive. Sam is too open to things, which Clark's like,
Oh, he likes to embrace others. He really does.
but
Unlike
it's the way
Joel.
Sam does it that makes Clark a little sus, because Clark, yes, he does want to embrace others, but it's a bit of like, there's a little bit of cynicism. Like if somebody's giving him attitude, he'll give it back to them. Clark does have a not quite on the virulent scale of Andre, um, because Andre does tend to accidentally hurt people he loves through his temper. But Clark does have a bad, ferocious temper when challenge, when Ed, or dealing with jerks.
And
Um,
Sam's not really a jerk.
no, he's not, but Clark senses something's up with Sam.
Is
And he,
Joel more of a jerk according to Clark or Sam?
I guess in the conventional sense, Joel is more of a jerk because he's mean and he says mean things. And, just like, I have enough of your attitude, Mr. Farber. Um, but, but, um, but Sam, on the other hand, I think scares Clark a bit more.
That's really interesting. We need to explore this in the second part. I really want to see why Sam frightens him because Sam, gives off this nice retro innocent boy vibes, doesn't he?
It's kind of, but that's what scares Clark. He's like, Mr. Abramov, um, you don't have any ulterior motives behind that, do you? And I don't know. I think he's a little worried because uh, it reminds him of people he's encountered, like
That's
bad guys,
true. But
like
but
bad guys who've
Sam's
been
not
so
me.
nice.
Yeah.
Like these bad guys who say, "Oh, we're gonna help the world through our science," and then they turn out to be evil scientists or something.
I think that's an exaggeration.
Well, I
Sam,
mean, Sam's not an evil scientist, but he's worried like maybe Sam might become, I don't know, a spy or something, or maybe Sam might do something harmful, and I think that worries Clark. And also, Clark worries that Sam might delude a lot of people and might end up hurting people because Sam's not being real.
but Joel's not being real either.
That's true, but he feels that Joel's being more honest about himself.
That's true.
So, ironically, Sam terrifies Clark a bit more. Um, Joel makes him mad, but Sam scares him. I mean,
This is really interesting. And how about Andre? Don't forget him. He's part of this
I will.
podcast too.
I will
What
say
does he
okay.
think?
The last thing Clark will say to Sam, um, you wouldn't happen to be in contact with a Mr. Luther, would you?
No, who is he?
Oh, never mind, never mind. I just wanted to. You dodged a bullet there.
You're right. I think he has a little bit in common with Lex Luthor. Remember how in Red Sun at the end he was like to Lois, I don't know what I'm going to do next. Write the next
Oh
great
no!
American novel.
That's the
I
thing.
was like, this
Lex
is so
Luthor can be
Sam.
confident.
Sam
It's
wants to write
Sam.
all the
He
great
got red
American
hair like
everything, great American movie, great American musical drama, great American commercial. He wants his face on that Coca-Cola billboard.
he.
Great American novel.
He is like Lex Luthor because Lex Luthor wants fame. He wants to be the embodiment of this kind of perfectionism and charisma. And Lex Luthor, he wants all these ambitions. And the problem is, depending on what iteration you read or look at, Lex Luthor can be very charming. He can be very
True. He
persuasive.
can be, yeah.
You can be like we see this in Red Sun. I
Yeah.
see some of this in Golden Age a little bit. I see a lot of it in Silver Age. I even see it in cinematic Snyderverse because the first half of Batman versus Superman, Lex Luthor just seems like the most cheerful, peppery little
Oh,
thing.
that's true. He
So
is.
peppery. He's
Yeah.
like,
I saw
oh
the
my
clips
god,
of him.
he's
So
like,
no
oh my god,
wonder,
my
no wonder
favorite
he
people.
doesn't
Dear
like
friend and Clark
Sam. Oh
Kent.
my god.
He's like,
I
my
see it
favorite
now.
people. I'm so glad to see you guys. Thanks for coming to my demonstration. And then as the film progresses, it becomes terrifying because then he turns out to be this horrific monster.
Okay, so Clark, out of all my characters, I think he likes Malka the most, right?
Malka. Everyone loves Malka. Andre loves Malka. Clark loves Malka. He's
Yes,
like, Miss
exactly.
Spitzer. Clark's gonna open the door and he's like, "Oh, Miss Spitzer, I hope you're having a wonderful afternoon."
Yes, and she's like, yes, I am. Thank you so much, Mr. Kent.
And he's like, "How are your parents?" And he's like being so sweet because he is sweet.
Yeah, and she'll tell him and stuff like that. But yeah, that makes sense. I think she would be the most liked person, and unfortunately, you know what? I think Sam is more unlikable, for Clark and Kent than Joel.
Exactly, because Clark is just like, so you don't know Mr. Luther then, Sam, right?
No, no, of course not.
Oh, thank God. He's like, good, good. If you meet anybody with that name, avoid them. They're bad news.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay, and then he smiles, and then
Oh
I
my
guess
God.
Clark gets creeped out.
It's creeped out. Oh my gosh. Imagine if Sam's like, hey, Clark, I met that Mr. Luther guy. He ain't bad. He's going to help finance my musical.
Yeah, I know.
Oh my
Yeah,
god,
he's gonna make me
no!
famous. He's gonna put my face on the Coca-Cola billboard. I'm gonna become the next Valentino sex symbol, baby.
And then I guess I don't know. I guess Lex Luthor is going to try to finance films. He's going to
Oh,
call it Lex Film.
he would,
Yeah.
yeah.
But I guess to Andre, I guess another similarity I see in them is that um they both, have a ferocity of temper. They get, very mad when they see something wrong going on, and they
That's
get
true.
very mad.
They do, yeah.
I mean, we kind of see this with Andre with I guess one recent iteration was something unfortunate had happened to Tatuzia, and this made Andre very, very, very mad.
Mhm.
Yeah.
But
Um,
yes, this was an amazing, amazing
role play.
podcast. I love the role play. I love how, we had all three of them interacting. Even though this was a Andre versus Clark podcast, it turned into Andre versus Clark versus Sam versus Joel.
Versus so many people versus and I guess another thing to point out, I guess both Andre and Clark are kind of innocent farm boys.
That's true. They are,
They
yeah.
they like the I mean, honestly, if Andre could go back to farming, like he had when he was young, he would. He'd love to do that. And I think Clark, to a large degree, Clark always wants to be drawn back to the farm. He wants to go back to farming. And you do see that like in certain things like in like say Kingdom Come, which
Mhm.
he does kind of go back to that for a while because he's kind of tired of the superhero stuff.
That makes
Um,
sense.
and Andre's the same way. Andre is a son of the steppe. His blood is in the dawn steppe, and
Right.
I think there will always be a huge hunk of Clark's heart left back in the fields of Kansas. And I guess another thing too is they're both dark haired, dark eyed beefcakes.
That's true. Yeah,
Yeah, they do look a little similar, I guess. I mean, you pointed that out with
that's
my
true.
Valentine.
Yeah, especially in also The Sims too. You remember they looked like twins?
They look like twins. They had a lot of
Yeah.
similar, and also too, I think they're both very warm, very sociable. I think also too, Clark doesn't get enough credit for this, but Clark can be very romantic.
Oh, yeah. I think we need to have another podcast for that, showing Clark's views on romance versus Joel's, because that is the most drastic difference, isn't it?
That is the most drastic difference. And well, both are also, I think, idealized in the way that they love. Even though Andre used to be sort of a cavorting womanizer in his youth, he's realized the fallacy and insubstantial of it because now he wants to pursue Tatuzia. Granted, though, I think he's a little more fierce about it, just because Tatuzia is more fierce.
Mhm.
But Clark is very passionate about his connection with Lois, and the more Lois learns about him and connects with him, the more she is passionate. And once she knows the truth, I think she's really wowed and amazed by it, and really admires him for balancing that. And
Mhm.
I guess in some ways one could say Tatuzia really loves and admires Andre because he has that moral backbone and he refuses to get corrupted like other men.
That's true. These are all really great points, and we need to explore this in future podcasts.
Definitely. I think we will. We'll probably have another Andre versus Clark and versus everybody.
Yeah. So, well, just to end it on one point,
Yeah,
Joel, in contrast, doesn't value, or he tells himself, or he tries to brainwash himself, rather, that he doesn't value his sexual or romantic connection with Malka. Like he only values her as a friend. Because he thinks that it's easier to quantify friendship than anything too overly emotional. Because he wants to detach himself from being overly emotional.
that's true. That's true. So he's opposite of Andre and Clark, who
He
get.
doesn't want to throw himself into romance because he's afraid of losing his head.
That's true. Meanwhile, Andre and Clark really don't really care about losing their head because I think they don't think they have a head to lose. They think that romance will be the clarifying and guiding light for them.
Right, so it's the opposite for Joel. He thinks that romance will make his life worse, it'll make him very confused, he'll lose his sense of self, and then he'll just waste his life being amorous and doing nothing.
That's true, which is weird that he thinks that he loses the sense of self because for people like Clark and Andre, to them being amorous and loving another person, especially someone they really admire and care about, to them they feel like that creates a better sense of self. Like we see this with Clark's connection to humanity. You know, Lois is such an important part of his grounding after he loses his parents, with humanity with Lois. And then with Andre, Tatuzia is very key to his reconciliation and reconnection with society and humanity, and also rediscovering a new sense of self he never knew he had.
That's true. I think it's because Joel connects his sense of self with being, very involved in thought experiments and, all these justifications and convictions. But if he becomes too involved with someone and becomes obsessed with them, he doesn't have time to think about these thoughts anymore. And he'll just become this besotted, sex obsessed person who just goes to work and then just goes home and I don't know, like doesn't have time to think about these things anymore. And he derives his sense of self from thinking about, his convictions and his philosophies and these things that demarcate him from quote unquote the average person.
That's true. That's true. That makes a lot of sense why Joel does, and it's very valid in his point of view. But for guys like Clark and Andre, it don't fly. I'm like,
I think it's
"Mm-mm."
also like you said, his hubris, because Joel doesn't think he's like other people.
That's true. And I think the thing with Clark and Andre, they think they're like other people. They think, well, everyone's like me, aren't they?
That's
You know,
true. I
they
think
do think
that's one
that.
of the things about Clark. He's kind of like the everyday guy, but just with powers.
Exactly. There was an interesting, like when you see the first Golden Age, he's very unsure about his powers and how to use them. And he doesn't actually realize the extent of his powers. He's like, well, I guess I can do things better than other people a little bit, but that doesn't make me too special. But then the more he works with it, he's like, oh my gosh, I can actually do these things. It kind of frightens him, but he's like, I have to keep it under wraps and only use it in emergencies. I'm just going to try to, do Clark 75% of the time. But if there's an emergency and I need to break out the superpowers, I can't. I got to have an identity to go with that. And this is why he does it. And there was also an interesting work that explored that more. There's been other works that have explored this, but there was one. Um, it was actually meant for a younger audience, but I thought it was a very touching, beautiful story. I was called Superman Smashes the Klan, and I really enjoyed it because it was dealing with his beginnings and his uncertainties, and he's wondering how people will react to him and his powers, and he just wants to be like everybody else, but then he learns to
Mm,
embrace that you can be like everybody else, but you can also embrace what you have and who you are. And it was
that's
beautifully
very
done.
interesting.
It was very beautifully done. It was beautifully written. Like I said, it was meant for a younger audience, but honestly, it was written so good that I think even a very, very mature audience can appreciate it.
Yeah, that's very interesting because I think in contrast to that, and we'll end the podcast after this. This is getting too long. I think we need to probably put it in another episode.
Yeah,
I think one of the most interesting things you said here is that both Andre and Clark think of themselves like other people and they want to be like other people. They don't want to be too different. But
they don't. They,
Joel and Sam, on the other hand, they always take pride in the fact that they are different.
oh my gosh, that's why Clark is scared of Sam. He's like, oh my gosh,
Yeah,
what's
Sam
really
thinks he's
good?
more innovative, more headstrong, and has more interesting ideas than most people. And Joel,
No,
he
that's what
thinks,
Lex Luthor says.
yeah, and I think Joel, he thinks he's more cynical than other people. So I
He
guess,
sees more
he's
dark.
smarter because he doesn't have to put so much effort into things that are not worth it. But most people are just wasting themselves on these Hollywood lies that tell them you have to put effort into this, but you're actually wasting all your time on that, just like, like a little hamster on
Joel.
a wheel.
Joel is Batman.
Yeah.
Joel is Batman.
Yes.
Wait, we need to have one where Joel meets Batman, where he meets
That would
Bruce.
be very interesting. I think we should discuss that.
We should, yeah, that would be fun. Now I get to role play as Bruce Wayne.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think Joel is more like Batman, you're right.
He is like Batman. Oh my gosh, he is. He's so much like Batman. I'm surprised he doesn't don on a black cape and mask and have a cool car.
But he does wanna destroy people like Superman.
He does. He does. And we all know some of the ugly stuff that goes on between Bruce and Clark.
Exactly. This is a very interesting tie-in. We're just bringing more and more characters in.
We are. We're bringing so many
Yeah.
people in. We'll have to figure out who Malka's like. I want to say Lois, but then again, like Golden Age and a lot of other versions of Lois, she's not really like Malka at all. I mean, the closest thing to Malka, I think, is the cinematic version of Lois.
Right. I think Malka has one thing in common with Golden Age Lois, but it's on a smaller scale. She has no time or of course no education to become a reporter, right? Or the chance to become someone. So I guess she uses her sleuthing skills to expose Joel's contradictions. But not society's contradictions or,
Just
problems, but Joel's fucking problems.
that's true, and she does. She can handle all of Joel's problems, and she embraces his vulnerability just like any version of Lois does, whether it's Golden Age, Silver Age. That is one thing. If people ever get Lois right, and some do, and I applaud them for it, is that Lois will never be scared of Clark and his powers, and she will always understand who he really is, and she will always embrace and protect his vulnerability. When he tries to put on a tough facade for the world, he knows he can come to Lois. He knows that he can even break down and cry in front of her, and she won't judge him.
That's true. And I think as like in a similar vein, Malka is never scared of Joel's darkness.
She's never scared of his darkness. She's never,
His
and that was
insanity, his
crazy,
self-doubt, his
his weirdness.
self-denial.
And that was something beautiful. I also like from that same story, Superman smashes the Klan. I really liked what Clark said why he loved Lois, and it was because it was one of the first times ever that he felt that somebody outside of his family could understand him and not be scared of who he really is, and he doesn't have to hide himself with her.
Right. I think Joel, he doesn't care if people are scared.
He
I
wants
don't
to
think he
scare.
gives a fuck if
He
Sam is
wants.
scared
He's
of
like
his.
Batman. I want to scare. I am the knight.
He's like, go ahead. You have the full freedom to be scared of whatever you want, or not be scared, or hate me. I
He's
mean, he's
Batman.
like, I'm not a defensive person because when he was young, he was bullied because he was defensive. So now he's gone the other way. He doesn't give a fuck. Like he's like, people have the freedom to react or not react to my beliefs as they want.
He's Batman. I am the knight. I am Batman.
He doesn't have a cool car though.
He needs to get a cool car. He needs that cape. He needs that cape.
Yeah, you know
Yeah.
what? We're gonna make him dress like Batman in The Sims then.
Yes. Instead of the Superman outfit, I take that back. As much as I wanted to say cinematic Clark and Lois are like Joel and Malcolm, which they are. The tenderness and nonverbal communication is beautiful, and it reminds me so much of Joel and Malcolm. But Joel by himself, he is Batman. He's
Yeah,
Batman.
we're gonna have to put that outfit on him, and he's gonna have to duke it out with Clark.
Duke it out with Clark, and duke it out with Andre too, because duke it out with Clark
Good
and Andre.
lord, like he's making so many enemies, and Sam.
I don't know. Can Sam be Lex Luthor now?
Yes, I think he should.
He doesn't have to be bald. I mean, you can just make him like the cinematic version because he actually
He doesn't have to be
that
bald.
version looks like him. That
Yeah, it
cinematic version
does.
with
Yeah,
the hair and the
yeah,
craziness,
and the body language.
and the body like, oh my gosh, my two favorite people.
But he needs to be a little bit more bro, because Sam's a little bit more dude bro.
He's a little more dude, bro. But also Sam has those quips like Lex, well, we all know the shortest road to Superman is a little thing called Lois Lane. Got it, Lane, like road.
Hmm.
Such a terrible joke. Thanks, Sam. He would make a joke like that.
Yeah,
You
he
know,
would. But yeah, I think this was a great episode. Thank you so much for this.
this was fun. I loved it. Let's have another one very time soon.
I know we should. All right, see you.
See you. Bye.